Hey guys, Mike from CoachMikeMcDonald.com here. And do you struggle with overcoming objections in network marketing? Well, today's video, I want to go through 7 steps you can use to overcome any objection in network marketing. The first step that you want to do is to hear the person out. One thing that a lot of people make the mistake of is they don't actually fully listen to the objection after the presentation. So sometimes what can even happen is the person will talk themselves into your business and into buying, even if they have objections, where they might say, oh, I don't really have the money, but they think about it and they're like, well, I could put it on my credit card, or I could move some things around, I could figure it out. So yeah, let's get started. Whereas if you just jump on their throats and try and overcome the objection right away, you could save yourself a lot of time by letting them overcome the objection themselves. So again, hear them out fully so you can fully understand what the correct objection is that you need to handle or overcome. So that's step 1. Step 2 is going to be to acknowledge the objection. So again, one thing that you want to do, you don't want to say that, hey, they have the best objection, like, oh, that's a valid objection, you're right, you shouldn't get started. But it needs to be something along the line of like, hey, I get it. You know, I completely understand where you're coming from, or I understand how you could feel that way in your situation. Something like that, where you acknowledge the objection. Step 3 and 4, I feel kind of go together. You almost do them both at the same time. But what it is you restate the objection and isolate the objection. So step 3 and 4 is going to be restate the objection and isolate the objection. So what that means is you state their objection that they said to you back to them in your own words, and then you isolate it at the same time, so you don't have to overcome multiple objections. So an example would be if somebody said, you know, I like it, but I just don't have the money. And say something like, hey, I get it, I completely understand, you know, times are tough right now. So just so I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is you like everything, you know, the product makes sense, the business makes sense. If you could figure out the money, you'd be ready to get started, but right now you just feel like you have your money allocated to different things, and that's the reason that you don't want to get started right now. Is that the case, or is there something else that'd be holding you back from getting started right now? So again, you restated the objection, then you isolated it by saying, is that the reason that I'm hearing, or is there some other thing that would be holding you back from getting started right now? So again, you don't want to get locked into a chain of objections where you answer the money objection and they say, oh yeah, well, but I also don't have the time, or oh well, I need to talk to my spouse, and oh yeah, I need to think about it. Where if you isolate it, you can just overcome that one objection and move forward. So again, 3 and 4 is going to be to restate and isolate the objection. Step 5 is from there, once you've isolated the objection, is going to be close with a story. They're using feel, felt, found. So what that means is you say, hey, I completely understand how you feel. I felt the same way when I first saw it, and what I found is that I figured out the money, and I needed to figure out the money, because if I didn't, I was going to continue to struggle year after year, always having a couple $100 be an issue. And what I found is that when I figured it out and I put it on a credit card and I got started, you know, and plugged into the system, handful of years later, now a couple $100 isn't an issue for me anymore. So that's, again, step 5 is going to be to close with a story using feel, felt, found. Now when you're closing with feel, felt, found, it doesn't necessarily have to be your story that you're using. So for example, you could use someone else's story. So let's say the objection was time. So you could say something like, hey, I know how you feel. My buddy Travis, he felt the same way when he saw this. He was working 80 hours a week, had a couple young children he was trying to raise, working 80 hours, running a few businesses all across the country. So he felt the same way as you, and he didn't feel like he had time either. But what he found is that when he carved out some time and made a decision to make this work, that it wasn't about how much time he had to put into it, it was how effective he was with his time. That's when he made the shift, and again was able to carve out some time to build a business where now he has complete time because he doesn't have to show up to the business 80 hours a week. He's created that freedom in his life through doing this business. So if you could figure out the time, would you be ready to get started? So again, that ties into step 6, which is asking a closing question. So after you've gone through that story, you follow it up with asking a closing question. So for example, on the money side, you might say, hey, I completely understand how you feel. I felt the same way. And what I found is that when I figured out the money and made a decision to make this work and plug into the system, now a few $100 isn't an issue for me anymore. So if we could help you figure out the money, would you be ready to get started? And then step 7 is going to be silence. So whenever you ask a closing question, don't talk again until the other person talks. The person that talks first loses. It's kind of a cliche saying, but it's pretty true in this situation. So if you ask a closing question, wait it out. Use silence to your advantage, and it's going to feel uncomfortable for both parties, but again, what you want to do is use silence to your advantage, and when you do that, people have to answer the question. So if you ask somebody a closing question, it's weird to not answer. So again, if you phrase it within the story format of feel, felt, found, and if you could figure it out, would you be ready to get started? It's a very effective technique to use. So overall, the 7 steps, again, step 1 is going to be to hear them out and listen fully to their objection. Step 2 is going to be to acknowledge their objection, saying like, hey, I get it, I completely understand. Step 3 and 4, you do at the same time. You restate and isolate the objection. Step 5 is going to be close with a story or using feel, felt, found. And step 6 is going to be asking a closing question. And then 7 is going to be to use silence to your advantage. So again, kind of full circle how it would sound if someone said, hey Mike, I really like it. This seems awesome, but I just really don't have the money. I would say something like, hey, you know what? I get it. I completely understand. Times are tough right now. So just so I'm understanding you correctly, you like everything. Everything makes sense for you. The business side, the money side, our products, that all makes sense for you. So if you could figure out the money, you'd be ready to get started? Or is there something else that'd be holding you back from getting started right now? If they said, nope, the money's the only thing, then I would say, hey, you know what? I completely understand how you feel. I felt the same way when I first saw this. What I found is that when I figured out the money, it was so worth it because I was always spinning my wheels and a couple $100 was always an issue. And I just found that if I didn't do anything different, it was always going to be that way. If I didn't make some changes in my life, start building a business, start creating an asset for myself that could pay me more money than what I was making, punching in and punching out, at work, I was always going to struggle financially. So what I found is that when I figured out the money and I plugged into the system and went to work, now, flash forward, a few $100 isn't an issue for me anymore. So if you could figure out the money, if we could figure out a way to help you do that and come up with that, would you be ready to get started today? And then that's about it. You go through those 7 steps, and then you can do that with any single objection that somebody throws out at you. So if they're like, hey, I really need to talk to my spouse, you'd be like, hey, I get it. I completely understand. I know how you feel. If I'm understanding you right, it sounds like that you love everything. It makes sense. If your husband or your wife was sitting here with you right now and they had just seen it and you'd be ready to get started, or is there something else that'd be holding you back? And then again, they're either going to agree and say, yep, that's it, or they'll give you another objection and you do the same process. So again, the 7 steps that you want to go through to overcome any objection is going to be to hear them out, acknowledge the objection, restate and isolate the objection, close with a story or use feel, felt, found, ask a closing question, and then use silence to your advantage. So again, hopefully you guys get a lot of benefit and value out of this video. If you did, feel free to comment and share. And if you are in network marketing, one of the biggest things people struggle with is inviting. So if you're struggling with what to say to get people to see your business or to check out what you're doing professionally, be sure to head on over to CoachMikeMcDonald.com and enter your name and email for for access to my free audio training on how to invite professionally and the 14 proven keys to inviting for your business. So again, to get access to that, head on over to coachmikemcdonald.com/inviting and enter your name and email for that free training. But thanks again for tuning in. We'll talk to you again soon.